All right, so we're going to be jumping into the next chapter about fraud and internal controls. And with that, we're going to take a look at some of the basic concepts associated that we want to make sure you're aware of when it comes to controlling. And basically, internal controls are most concerned with assets, the things of value. We're trying to conserve, make sure that cash isn't stolen, inventory is not stolen, fixed assets don't disappear. Anything that can be sold or turned to cash, those are things we're trying to protect. So there are some basic principles of internal controls that we want to talk about. And the basic principles revolve around protecting those assets. We first want to establish who's responsible for the assets. If no one's responsible, it very easily gets lost and nobody's there to blame. So we need somebody in control. We want to make sure we have adequate records when we buy stuff, when we maintain stuff, when we sell stuff. We need the records to be on top and easily accessible, readable, understandable, and have a track record of what we've done. Number 3 talks about an insurance policy. It's called bonding. We bond employees that handle cash. So often a bank will bond their employees, that tellers or other workers in the bank. A casino, gambling, lots of cash is being moved, and we want to control the cash throughout. So I got a question for you. Let's talk about a bank employee stealing money. And I'm going to ask you to come off mute. Let's go ahead and unmute. And my question to you is, we've got a bank teller. Let's get everybody off mute, please. Go ahead and take the mic, turn on your microphones. We got a bank teller and they steal $5,000. Do we report the crime? Do we pursue it? Do we take them to court? Do we get a conviction? Or do we let it go? So my question to you is, and actually let's start by putting in the chat. Go ahead and in the chat say cash theft. What do we do? Let it go or pursue or other? It depends. Everybody gets a chance to contribute. Put something in the chat. Pursue, let it go. It depends. Okay, so I got a materiality comment. That's a good comment. Thank you, Dalton. Pursue, depends. Okay, let's follow up on the depends. Because I kind of like the depends. You know me. Depends on what? Let's think about it. What does it depend? Why would you pursue or why would you not pursue? Anybody?
Sometimes the cost of, let's say, going to court would exceed the amount stolen. So therefore, you're just losing more money than you're really saving.
Okay, so it's a cost benefit. Legal costs get pretty pricey. $5,000, eat your losses and call it a day. Would your answer change if I jumped it to 20,000? Probably, maybe. Okay. Somebody else, give me some more depends. So there are a bunch of other issues here, not just a question of legal costs, which is quite valid. Any other thoughts?
It would also depend on if they still have the money. If they get caught red-handed and they just give it back and then they just get fired.
So they may have spent the money. So Herbert, thank you. They may have spent it already. They don't have it. You pursue it. What's the purpose if they don't have the money? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, that part too. But if they still had the money and they could just give it back.
Oh, okay. So if you confront them and say, just give it back, we won't pursue. Okay. That makes that's a logical conversation. Other thoughts? Any marketing considerations? I know this is an accounting question, but any marketing considerations you can think of?
I mean, it could look bad if it gets out there that the employees are like stealing money from the bank, and then less people are going to want to come and deposit their money and have accounts.
The PR sucks. I mean, the public relations on this is it can be a disaster if someone says, wait a minute, you can't control your money? That's my money that they're stealing. And if you can't control it, I don't want to do business with you. And that's a real valid concern. Really good point. Good insight. Okay. I'll tell you, most banks will let it go. $5,000, $10,000. They'll just fire the employee. They won't pursue it, and they'll be on their way. So what's the employee going to do? They say, oh, I've got 5 years of banking experience. I'm going to go apply for a new job. And what do? They applied to another bank and said, I got experience. I know how to work in a bank. And the bank says, cool, we don't have to train you. And they call up the old bank and said, hi, we're looking for a reference. And human resources can say, yes, they worked for us from January 5th to November 7th of 2001 to 2006. And that's all I can tell you. They won't tell you anything more. So no record, no report. They're off the hook. They got a new job, then they steal from the next bank. Okay. So it's a tough call, but that's the nature of the beast. So you need to have adequate internal controls, checks and balances that prevent that from ever happening, or as best you can. Nothing is foolproof. There's something called collusion. When two parties get together, there's no holding back. I mean, think about it in church on a Sunday. You pass around the collection plate. People throw money on the plate, okay, or in an envelope, whatever. Goes into a back room. If there's one person there, it's all too easy to say, well, I work hard for this church. I'll keep half of it. Not ethical, but can happen. How about if there's 2 or 3 people? It's a little bit harder to say, well, a buck for the church and a buck for you and a buck for the church and a buck for me. But that can happen too. So it's a balance like anything else. Okay. So I have a question. Why wouldn't HR, human resources, tell the other bank about the person stealing? For legal problems. They were never convicted. It's all hearsay. And what's going to happen? If you tell, by the way, if you ask for a reference from another employer, they can't say anything about you because they say something bad and you don't get hired, you can sue your former employer. You can say they were always late to work. Well, that's a relative statement. But the person who doesn't get hired and says, well, your last employer told me you were late for work all the time. You now have recourse to go back to your prior employer and sue them because you didn't get the job because of what they said, even if it was true. That's not the point. The point is they ratted you out and now they're subject to potential lawsuit because it's their fault you didn't get hired, even though it may be true. So unless there was a court case or something that they were able to convict and you have documented proof, because they do check your records, convicted felons and convicted of all kinds of other things. But those are questions that will happen, and the prior employer is running scared. They won't say a word about anything unless you gave permission. If you said, hey, could you be a reference for me? So-and-so is going to call you. And even then, if you can't say a good reference, you don't want to be a reference. But human resources can't answer those questions. It's like there's certain questions they can't ask in an interview. I mean, if you were always late because you were taking care of your kids and now they reported you and said, well, she had a problem with childcare and yeah, she was a good worker, but she was always late. Well, again, that's a negative that may cause you not to get hired and you can go back to that other employer because the previous job you had. So yeah, HR won't answer reference questions unless it's under the table. I mean, I've done reference calls that, Scott, not on the record. You don't want to hire this guy. Now that's a different conversation, and I can't put that on the record. And I can't write that in the documentation and not hire them. But I can find all kinds of reasons to hire or not hire. So fair question. Thank you for asking that. All right. Let's go back and take a look at some of these other things that go into internal control. So separate record keeping from custody of assets. So we want to keep the records separate on who owns, who's maintaining, who's in control. We divide responsibility for related transactions. So we don't want the same person opening the mail, writing out the deposit slip for checks that come in the mail, traveling to the bank, making the deposit, coming back out, writing the checks, and reconciling the bank account. If that's one person doing all that, there's a potential that they could grab a check and kind of sign it over to themselves. There's a potential that they can doctor the books. there's a potential that they can sign a check to somebody who says, hey, here, this is going to my other business, even though it shouldn't be going there. We need technological controls. We need technology built in that handles an automation process and handles the controls. And then we have regular audits or independent reviews, both internal audits and external or third-party audits from accounting firms. So those are the things that help keep things in sync and in proper form. Okay. I'm going to touch on Sarbanes-Oxley, 2002. We're going to take a look at some of the frauds that are going out there, and we'll talk about Enron and WorldCom, which were two of the folks that put Sarbanes-Oxley on the map. SOX basically made it so that a CEO cannot say it's my controller's fault or my CFO's fault, my chief financial officer. Sarbanes-Oxley says the CEO has to sign and the CFO has to sign, and if something's amiss, they take responsibility. The buck stops there. It also added internal control reviews. So part of SOX is a requirement that an internal control audit takes place and reviews these controls to make sure the safeguards are in place. And so something called Section 404 evaluates internal control processes. Okay. All right, let's take a look. We're going to show a video, and we're going to take a look at some frauds, and you have a discussion item that you get to pick a fraud, a favorite fraud that means something to you. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to take a look at, let's go into our, I had a separate screen. We'll get there. There we go. All right. So let's take a look, and we're going to look at some top frauds, top 25 in rapid succession. Next 15 minutes.
Whether centered around corruption, bribery, fraud, or other kinds of greed, have a significant impact on the economy as a whole. After all, trust and credit play a substantial role in any economy. Once you remove honesty, the whole stack of cards can come tumbling down. Of course, while some companies can make a comeback after a scandal, many others go down with a ship and file for bankruptcy. I'm Michael Phillips 25, and as we peel back the covers of financial greed, here's a list of the 25 biggest corporate scandals ever. #25. The Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme. This made the list not only for the sheer amount of money involved, at least $65 billion in client accounts, but because the people he conned are some of the smartest people in the world. People entrusted him with their charitable funds, but they were used for his luxurious lifestyle and personal gain.
He was such a nice guy, although one son died of suicide, the other died of cancer. He's still in jail.
4. Health South. Organized and directed by the company CEO Richard Scrushy, this financial hoax involved coming up with fictitious transactions and accounts to boost the company's earnings. The fraud embezzled $1.4 billion, which was reported as the company's earnings from 1996 to 2000.
And they're still around. Actually, Florence has one of the rehab centers. It was renamed about 3 years ago from Health South to something else. They're downtown here in Florence. So they did not go out of business, but a lot of money was stolen. CEO never went to jail for it. The guy who went to jail was Weston Smith. He was one of the CFOs. He was the whistleblower, but he ended up in jail.
3. He almost got away with it when he was acquitted by a friendly Alabama jury, but the prosecutors kept at it, and he was convicted in June 2006 of bribery charges made on Alabama's governor to receive a seat on the Medical Regulatory Board.
So bribery.
23. Tyco Limited. Tyco International is a diversified manufacturing conglomerate that deals with electronic components, healthcare, fire safety, security, and fluid control, with headquarters in New Jersey. In 2005, its CEO, Dennis Kozlowski, and CFO, Mark H. Swartz, were found guilty of stealing $600 million from the company. These two symbolize the excesses of executive compensation at shareholders' expenses, where Kozlowski will be remembered for the $2 million birthday bash he gave his wife on a Mediterranean.
That was Jimmy Buffett, who came to a Mediterranean island for his wife's birthday. Compliments to the company.
Island at the company's expense. 22. Lance Armstrong and the Livestrong Foundation. Lance Armstrong not only held the title of a Tour de France champion and is the man behind the Livestrong Foundation, but he also owns several businesses and investments. He owns the coffee shop Juan Piloto Cafe, a bike shop named Mellow Johnny, and had several $1 million invested in the American bicycle component manufacturer SRAM Corporation. However, due to his doping confessions, he lost his title and several sponsorships, and SRAM cut ties with him. 21. Enron Corporation. Enron was the it company at the turn of the century, as it oozed with wealth, smarts, and power. However, this Houston-based energy company toppled into a spectacular bankruptcy due to a painstakingly planned accounting fraud made by its accounting firm, Arthur Andersen. Once considered a blue-chip stock, Enron shares dropped from $90 to 50 cents, which spelled disaster in the financial world when thousands of employees and investors saw their savings vanish with the company as it filed for an earnings restatement in October 2001. 20.
Of Enron.
Arthur Andersen. Speaking of Arthur Andersen, this Chicago-based company voluntarily relinquished its licenses to practice as certified public accountants, CPAs, in the U.S. due to the Enron accounting scandal.
They were called the Big Five at one point. When Arthur Andersen went out of business because of Enron, they became the Big Four, the four largest CPA firms.
This was a blow, considering that it was one of the world's top 5 accounting firms prior to the scandal. It resulted in the loss of 85,000 jobs and corporate rebranding. 19. Bear Stearns Companies Incorporated. This is one of the biggest U.S. government bailouts that helped avoid a domino effect of financial market failures.
Bigger than GM.
Ranking as one of the largest global investment banks, securities trading, and brokerage firms in the world, Bear Stearns was nearly bankrupted before it sold itself to JP Morgan Chase for $2 a share, or $240 million. This was further bolstered by a guarantee of $30 billion worth of loans given by the Federal Reserve to the company. 18. Swiss Air. Swiss Air, a former national airline of Switzerland and a major international airline, was grounded in October 2001 due to a bad expansion move. With 30% of its shares in stocks owned by the Swiss government, the company implemented the Hunter strategy, a major expansion program. However, this resulted in a financial crisis that also affected its parent company, S Air Group, which was already hurt by the September 11th attacks. As the entire Swiss Air fleet was grounded and officially dismantled in March 2002, it was later acquired by Crossair and the liquidation firm Jurg Haas. 17. Parmalat. Parmalat, an Italian company, is the leading global producer of ultra-hot temperature milk and other foods. However, its founder, Callisto Tanzi, was accused of questionable accounting practices in 2003 when a 14 billion euro hole was discovered in the company's accounting records. This resulted in one of the biggest corporate scandals in history. It turns out he was selling credit-linked notes to the company and diverting the company's funds elsewhere. 16. Banninter. Banco Intercontinental, or Banninter, was the second largest privately held commercial bank in the Dominican Republic. Its demise resulted from political corruption in 2003, as fraudulent bookkeeping and political influence by all the major Dominican political parties resulted in a $2.2 billion deficit, which was equal to 12 to 15% of the country's GDP. 15. Adelphia Communications Corporation. This Pennsylvania-based company was ranked as the 5th largest cable company in the U.S. before it yielded to bankruptcy in 2002 due to internal corruption. The company incurred a $2.3 billion debt, and its founders were charged with securities violations. John and Timothy Regas were sentenced to 15 to 20 years in prison, while 5 other officers were indicted. They'd made a complicated cash management system where they diverted funds to other family-owned entities. 14. Global Crossing Limited. This company proved an incredible scandal is not necessarily the end of the business road. In terms of assets, the company's bankruptcy can be considered the 7th largest filing in American history. The total assets given at the filing were $22.4 billion, with debts amounting to $12.4 billion. The debt was amassed by 4 CEOs of the computer networking services company. Each was given $23 million in personal loans, which were ultimately forgiven. However, in 2004, the company began to show improved margins and even announced acquisitions of FiberNet and IMSAT in 2006. 13. HIH Insurance. This corporation's downfall is considered the largest in Australia's history. HIH Insurance was Australia's 2nd largest insurance company until it entered into provisional liquidation in 2001. It incurred losses totaling $5.3 billion, where its director, Rodney Adler, was sentenced to 4.5 years of jail time due to obtaining money by false or misleading statements and failure to discharge his duties as a director in good faith and in the best interests of the company. 12. Martha Stewart's mess. Martha Stewart is a household name due to her endeavors as a business magnate, author, and magazine publisher. She is very successful in all her business ventures and has numerous best-selling books. However, she became entangled in the Imclone insider trading affair in 2002 and was even indicted on 9 counts of securities fraud and obstruction of justice. She was able to bounce back, however, and even regained her company in 2012.
Convicted of lying.
11.
Not the
Deutsche
crime.
Bank spying scandal. Deutsche Bank AG is a German global banking and financial services company that was caught spying not only on its board members, but also on the personal life of some of its investors. As Germany's largest bank and the largest foreign dealer in the world with a presence in Europe, USA, Asia Pacific, and the emerging markets, the scandal took quite a toll. In 2006, the bank succumbed to paranoia when it hired an external detective agency to snoop on contacts between board members and the Munich-based media magnate Leo Kirch and his associates, whom they had litigation with. Due to the scandal, the German government vowed to have a new privacy protection law for workers. 10. Urban Bank. This was one of the largest banks in the Philippines until it was closed down on the basis of liquidity by the Philippine Deposit Insurance Corp. However, the liquidation grounds were not the big issue here. The big scandal was that some of Urban Bank's officers were later criminally charged with economic sabotage due to their falsified supervision and examination sector reports to the Monetary Board. 9. Jérôme Kerviel and the Société Générale banking scandal. Jérôme Kerviel is a rogue trader who tripped up the world's financial market when his unauthorized trading in the securities markets using the bank's computers resulted in 4.9 billion euro losses to the Société Générale funds. The worst part of the issue came when the bank's executive tried to mask the fraud by unwinding his trades. This resulted in trading panic all over the Atlantic, causing a decline in European markets. 8. Barclays. Barclays, one of the world's largest banks, was hammered by a scandal involving LIBOR manipulation, where banks lend each other money at high rates. The company owned up to the allegation that it manipulated the London Interbank offered rate, which was tied to trillions of dollars worth of financial contracts and derivatives. The issue led to the resignation of the company's CEO, Bob Diamond, and the company was asked to pay $450 million. Other banks, like UBS, were also under investigation for the LIBOR rate rigging. 7. BRIEX. BRIEX is a Canadian mining company that bought a purported gold mine in Busong, Indonesia in March 1993. In 1995, the company announced the discovery of a veritable treasure chest that soared the company's stock prices to $286.50 Canadian on the Toronto Stock Exchange. However, this turned out to be the worst mining scandal of all time when it was discovered that workers and miners falsified crushed core samples by salting them with placer, or supergene gold constitutes. Because of this, BRIEX fell down the mine shaft after its stocks became worthless. 6. Barings Bank. Barings Bank is the oldest merchant bank in the city of London, which was founded by the German-born Baring family. This bank handled the Queen's personal bank and was once the financier of the Napoleonic Wars. However, the bank collapsed in 1995 when one of its employees, Nick Leeson, squandered and lost £827 million through speculative investing over a 3-year period, which he masked by manipulating records. 5. Hewlett-Packard spying scandal. This spying scandal was purportedly at the behest of HP chairwoman Patricia Dunn. In connection with an information leak, she contracted a team of independent security experts to investigate some board members and several journalists by obtaining their phone records. However, this backfired and resulted in Dunn's resignation. 4. Siemens. Siemens AG and the Greek government went under fire for corruption and bribery involving the deal for the security systems for the 2004 Summer Olympic Games in Athens. While no serious charges were made, it's believed that the bribes may have been up to 100 million euros.
German
3.
company.
WorldCom. You might have wondered why the U.S.'s second largest long-distance phone company, WorldCom, filed for Chapter 11 in 2002. However, an internal audit report showed that the company had been using fraudulent accounting methods to hide its declining financial condition. The company's assets were inflated by around $11 billion, with $3.8 billion in fraudulent accounts. The company was purchased by Verizon Communications and was renamed Verizon Business Division. It's worth noting that this scandal prompted the approval of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act by the Senate, which introduced the most sweeping new business regulations since the 1930s. 2. Volkswagen. Not all corporate scandals have involved insider trading or spying. Some have involved prostitutes and luxury vacations. In 2005, the VW bribery affair made huge headlines as it was discovered that top executives were using said incentives to secure certain contracts and business relationships, all under the guise that it was in the interest of the company. Even though the story broke in 2005, investigations, resignations, and convictions happened over the course of about 5 years. 1. Facebook data privacy scandal. In early 2018, news sources revealed that over 87 million Facebook users' data leaked to the political consultancy Cambridge Analytica. Worse yet, Facebook admitted they knew Cambridge Analytica had been siphoning off data through a program called This Is Your Digital Life, and did nothing about it. Due to the huge breach in privacy, Mark Zuckerberg faced several hearings with US Congress and the European Union. Their stock and public faith in the platform has plummeted since the scandal. Enjoying our lists? Be sure to click that subscribe button on the bottom right and the notification bell so you don't miss out on new ones every Monday through Friday.
Okay. So that gives you a flavor of some of the frauds and some of the activities that happen. And it's not just restricted to corporate world or just to banks or financial institutions or manufacturers. It happens in nonprofits. It happens with FIFA, the soccer league. It happens with the World Olympic, the World Olympic Committee. It's all kinds of institutions. It's kind of a follow the money situation that it happens. I'm going to introduce to you a term and something called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. And I don't know how many of you might have heard of it, but the FCPA. Okay, it's a law on the U.S. on the books of the USA. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FCPA. back out. This is a place that the US government can come after you if you bribe a foreign government or a foreign entity. I'll give you an example. Walmart was found in violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. What is it that Walmart did? Well, they went out in Mexico and said, you know what? We're trying to build some stores in Mexico. It takes 12 months to 36 months to get a building permit approval. And they wanted to speed up the process. They said, that's a long time to wait to build a store, isn't that? So maybe we can speed it up by paying a little bribe here. And that bribe gets things signed sooner. So in 30 to 60 days, we get a permit instead of 12 months to 36 months. And they did that. And they got the permit. And they started construction. And they got caught. So what does it mean they get caught? It means that the US government said, that's not kosher. That's not a good thing to do. That's not what you should be doing to get business. As a matter of fact, it violates US laws. So the FCPA, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, was enforced and said, you got to pay fines and you got to make up for breaking the law. But what's the defense? Well, in the Middle East, that's how they do business. We buy Mercedes for the folks that are making the decisions on the committee that are going to buy our things, or in Korea, or in China. And this is not to slight any country in particular, because it happens around the world. So what if we're up against Siemens out of Germany, who's bidding on the Greek, the Olympics, and for a contract in equipment and machinery, and they were able to do a bribe and we're not? Well, we don't, because it's the wrong thing to do. That's the ethical thing to do. And you say, but that's how they do business in this country or in that environment. But it's like the terrorism. You don't negotiate with terrorists. That's their policy. You don't do any bribes. You don't violate any of those types of ethical activities. So the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act does have impact on how we do business around the world. Does it still happen? Sure. Are there informal things that are done? Yes. But the nature of the business, the nature of conducting business is above board, honorable, and ethical. And that's where the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act comes in. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at a couple more slides. I want to talk about from the internal control stuff we've been doing. All right. I'm not going to mention a lot about COSO. It also came out as part of SOX, Sarbanes-Oxley. But the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations, they have dealings with internal control and that Section 404 stuff. We took a look at this, principles of internal control, but let's talk about some of the principles. Things like established responsibility. Who is responsible? We need to clearly establish who is responsible. One person should be dedicated to that responsibility, not spread it over three. At that point, you can determine who is at fault. Think about a cash register drawer. And if you're a cashier and you work for 4 hours, and then someone else takes over your cash drawer. And then 4 hours later, someone else takes over a cash drawer. And you take a quick bathroom break for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and somebody else takes it over and you come back and take it. If during the day, your cash over and short, your count is off, whose fault is it? Well, there's no real way to determine that, even with video cameras and returning that and kind of reviewing that. So what usually is done is you get your drawer with $200. And then when you go and you punch out, you take your drawer, bring it over to the window, and somebody else brings their own drawer, cashes in, and gets things going. So you can actually determine who is responsible if it could be mistakes are made, or there could be literally stealing going on. Adequate records. Again, the whole point of internal control is protection of assets, the things of value. You don't want to protect your payables. You're not going to protect your bonds payable. Okay. You're not protecting your utilities expense. You're protecting your assets. Anything that can be sold, can be converted to cash, has a value. Okay. So we're protecting assets. You want good records. You want to monitor the activities of the company and who is responsible. But you want to make sure you have detailed records, the chart of accounts is maintained, pre-printed forms and pre-numbered forms, both on sales slips, purchase orders, and any kind of vouchers or any other systems. And then computerized point of sale are of great service in helping things out. And the last thing I want to talk about before we part for the day is bonding of employees. We mentioned the teller stealing money from the bank. All right. Now, if they're bonded, they're insured. Now, you may or may not have to pursue that, but it's an insurance policy to protect you from the cash that could get lost or stolen or could be taken. Okay. So employees handling a lot of cash and other assets should be bonded. And bonding means they purchase an insurance policy against theft by that employee. So that's all that bonding is. It's an insurance policy. It's a form of saying, hey, in case somebody steals, we're protected. We're not going to lose on the funds, lose the monies. All right, that gets to where I'm looking to get to today. Want to run and see if you have any further questions. Then on that note, we'll come back on Wednesday. We'll do one more revisiting of LIFO, FIFO, average cost, specific ID. There are some opportunities for extra credit coming up, like some QuickBooks classes coming up, negotiation classes coming up. I'll announce on Wednesday. Just got an email in between my last class and this class that I will share. And also mark your calendars a week from Thursday for an event on networking at 6 p.m. on the 18th. So we're going to be having the Accounting and Finance Club, but it's for everybody that might be interested in learning to network and to be effective in getting jobs, finding careers. With over 80% of jobs found through networking skills are invaluable. So you want to hone up on those, and we'll add that to our mix of activities. And that'll be a week from Thursday evening. On that note, any other questions before we part for the day? Don't forget this weekend, clocks spring forward. We got daylight savings time. But otherwise, I will look forward to seeing you on Wednesday. Have a good rest of the week. Take good care. Be well.
Have a good day.
Thank you.